Hello again, book lovers, and it's biography time again. This time it's a biography of Edgar Allan Poe by Nigel Barnes. Now, what do you know about Mr. Edgar Allan Poe? He was a weirdo, wasn't he? Had a terrible life, mired in poverty and drink, possibly insane, ... etc, etc. Well, we probably know Mr. Poe because of his short stories, which often have a gruesome twist to them. And so in our imagination, there was probably something gruesome about Mr. Poe's life. I love biographies personally, and this is a standard one thing happened and then another thing happened biography. It's very epistolatory. I mean, it's helpful that these people in times gone by wrote long letters to each other, which would be a great help to future biographers, obviously. And so the game here is to find out how much of the popular idea of Mr. Poe is based on truth. Now, one of the reasons I like biographies is because they're a good way of immersing yourself into a historical period. So here we're talking about the first half of the 19th century. The world of the men and women of letters of this era was nicely satirised for a while on Saturday Night Live, where one of the contributors would tear apart and lambast a work which was generally well received. I kind of imagine this would be based on Mark Twain, but having read Poe's reviews, I can see there's a little bit of Mr. Poe in there as well. He was very free with his invective, slagging off the literari of the New York circle, making himself very unpopular. And unpopular he was with a lot of people, largely due to his stinging criticisms, which seemed not to hold back at all. It's nice to look back over these almost 200 years and see how petty the squabbles between leading writers seem to us now. And Poe's relationship with them would swing one way and then another, particularly in the case of Mr. Griswold, who we will see later. Right, more themes. Poe was a drunkard, was he? He certainly got drunk inappropriately at just the wrong time again and again, but he does seem to have been successful in his battle to not get drunk. But it was almost forced upon him on several occasions, and once he'd had one, he just couldn't stop. His father, who wasn't his real father, brought Poe up and then subsequently refused to give him money to further his career. That would be one way of putting it. The other way would be that Poe continuously, right up to the final split, was writing begging letters, sometimes full of accusations, sometimes self-pitying. And if I'd been Mr. Allan, i.e. the father in inverted commas, I think I might have had a similar reaction. I mean, there does come a time when you expect your son to stand on his own feet. And yet Poe never seemed to. He seems to have been poor all his life. It was The Raven, that short poem, that catapulted him to fame, and in fact was the one fame-giving work that flared up brilliantly during his lifetime. It's actually a poem that I don't care for at all, or any of Poe's poetry. There's a list of the 600 works chronologically ordered, but we'll see a lot of them are reviews or poems. Not that many of the fantastic novels for which he's remembered, and which I remember reading quite happily. Apart from the seemingly wheedling and pathetic side of Mr. Poe, there's the intense desire to be accepted and needed, especially by women. He didn't know his real birth mother, but he was very attached to his adoptive mother, sister, etc., who all of them managed to seem to exist for decades on end in extreme poverty. And there are many low parts of Poe's life when he gets rescued by well-meaning individuals, but he never seems to quite get out of the gutter. His relations with women are tangled, certainly after the death of his wife Victoria, who he married when she was 13, but which proved to be a long and happy one, in as far as the circumstances would permit. And when he finally did die, and he was literally found on the street and scooped up from the freezing sidewalk, but unfortunately too late for anything to be done for him. Well, then the battle begins over his estate, his reputation, his letters, and his copyrights. And here enter Mr. Griswold, who rather inexplicably felt the need to put the hatchet in again and again and again, even after Poe had gone. And it turned out he was the writer of a very scurrilous satirical poem about Poe, which caused him quite a bit of damage to the end of his life. People spoke up for Poe on both sides of the Atlantic. Dickens was involved, for example, and a lot of the top American poets of the time managed to recover some of Mr. Poe's reputation. And that was the rather sad and short life of Mr. Edgar Allan Poe, who lives on, of course, through his tales. But as I said before, reading a biography like this gets you right into the social milieu and gives you an excellent feel for the times in which Mr. Poe was writing. Curious to us now, at this distance, odd to think that a man would stake his entire life on getting out a magazine that he was sure would be successful. Or that he could leap to fame on the back of one poem. Both these things I find a little hard to believe in this day and age. But they weren't back then, and if you want to know about Edgar Allan Poe, this biography is as good as any.